Welcome to the fourth and final video on part 3 of the Phaedo. In this video, we're going to be using the safe and sophisticated account of change that we developed in the last video and applying it to the soul. And by applying this account of change to the soul, we're going to thereby reply to KB's objection. That's our goal, giving a reply to KB's objection. Okay, so how are we going to apply the safe, but sophisticated account to the soul? Well, it's going to depend on a comparison between the body, on the one hand, and things like the brick, the object, and the soul, and things like the fire. So remember, the fire was essentially hot, right? It was part of the fire's nature that it was hot, and it could never lose that quality of being hot. If it lost its quality of being hot, it would go out. It would be destroyed, right? The fire would be destroyed if it wasn't hot. It's essentially hot. Wherever you have fire, you have heat. Similarly, the soul is going to be the bearer of life. So wherever you have the soul, you have life. The soul is essentially the bearer of life. Why? Well, that goes back to, remember, the first conception of the soul that we talked about a couple of videos ago, the soul as the breath of life. The anima that animates the animal. Right? So it's the breath of life. It's the thing that makes something alive. And so in that sense, the soul is the bearer of life. It's essentially alive. It's the thing that makes other things alive. And in particular, it makes the body alive by being in contact with the body, right? So the body is alive so long as it's in contact with the soul. Now, why does this show that the soul is immortal? Pause the video and think about it. All of the pieces are already here. We've already got everything we need to see that the soul is immortal. So pause the video, see if you can figure it out, and then come back. Okay, well, if you'd said that the soul is the bearer of life, so it's essentially alive, so it can't not be alive, then you would be right? I mean, it's part of the soul's nature that it is alive. So it's essentially alive. It's the bearer of life. Thus, the soul can't exist. There wouldn't be a soul at all without its being alive. Thus, it's got to be alive. It's necessarily alive, or it's deathless, right? And this is even clearer in the Greek. So in the Greek, thanatos is death, and immortal is just non-thanatos, or not thanatos, or undying. And so the soul is essentially alive. We can fill out the picture by trying to fill in, well, what's the opposite that the body can transform into, right? So how can the body transform so that it's not alive? Well, if it's dead, right? So right? So the body can be alive and then it can die. And after it's dead, when it's not alive, the body can be rejoined with the soul and then it becomes alive. So what is this? What goes in here? What's the bearer of death? Well, Socrates doesn't tell us, does he? This is sort of a mystery. I think there's a good reason that Socrates doesn't tell us what the bearer of death is. But I'm not going to get into that here. We can talk about it later, maybe. For now, you could think of this as like, I don't know, the angel of death, or, you know, I mean, we have, you know, in the tradition, there are these bearers of death, right? The Grim Reaper would be an example. So you could think of the bearer of death as the Grim Reaper, or you know, death, the personified being. And so because the soul is essentially alive, it's always going to be undying, right? It can't partake in its opposite. So while the brick can partake in either fire or snow, right? It's not part of the brick's nature that it's either essentially hot or essentially cold. And so it can both be hot and cold. Similarly, the body can both partake in life and death. And so it's neither essentially alive nor essentially dead. But the soul is essentially alive. And that's a strange feature of the soul, right? So we've seen how the soul is analogous to fire, right? The soul and fire are both bearers. Similarly for snow, right? I mean, snow is also a bearer. The soul is like that too. So that's the analogy between the soul and fire. But there's also a disanalogy. So we saw in the arguments for analogy, the reciprocity argument and the affinity argument, that you have to be very careful with arguments for analogy, and you have to be just as careful about the disanalogies as the analogies. And there's something special about the soul. There's something that's disanalogous to fire about the soul that makes this argument work. And without it, the argument wouldn't work. To get at this, let me raise an objection. The objection is, well, fire and snow are bearers, but they aren't deathless, right? I mean, snow melts. It can be destroyed. Fire can go out. It can be extinguished. And so neither fire nor snow is deathless. So why shouldn't we treat the soul in the same way as fire or snow, right? Why isn't the soul also able to be destroyed in the same way that fire and snow are able to be destroyed? Well, here's the disanalogy between the soul and fire. This is how they're different. It's not part of the essence of fire or snow to be deathless, but it is part of the essence of the soul. So it's included in the nature of the soul. It's part of what the soul is, that it won't die, that it won't be destroyed. But it's not a part of the essence of fire and snow, right? It's not included in their essence that they can't be extinguished or melt. No, they can. They can be destroyed. I mean, if they were deathless, if there was some eternal flame, this would just happen to be an accidental feature that it has, not essential to it. So if we had some eternal flame, well, it wouldn't be part of its nature as a flame that it was eternal. Rather, it'd be merely accidental feature of it. It would be external to its essence as a flame that it were eternal. And so perishing, going out, being extinguished, doesn't violate the essence of fire. It does not violate the essence of fire. But in the case of the soul, if the soul were extinguished or were to go out, well, then it would be destroyed. It would die. It would lose its essence, right? It would no longer partake in life because the soul is essentially alive. And so it would lose its nature. It would lose its essence. It would lose what it is if the soul were destroyed. And so because the soul can't lose its nature, it can't lose what it is. I mean, that's what it is. That's what defines it. It can't die, right? So a body perishes or ceases to exist when it dies. No problem there, right? No problem there. But a dying soul is contradictory, right? You can't conceive of a dying soul so long as you're thinking of the soul as the bearer of life. So long as you're thinking of the soul as essentially alive, then a dying soul is going to be contradictory. You can't have it. So how does how does this then offer a reply to K-Bees's objection? Well, I'm going to leave you to ponder that, and we will talk about it together when we meet in person next. Okay, see you then.